chapter 15, which is Purushottam Yoga. Now, before we come to this chapter, let us quickly take up the salient points of the previous chapter, Gunatraya Vibhag Yoga, or the yoga of distinction of the three gunas. So, there we had talked about how the beings are generated, and we talked about the three distinct gunas and their qualities. So, Sattva was stainless, luminous, healthy. Rajas was passionate, source of Trishna or source of thirst and attachment. Tamas was a delusional quality, that arises from ignorance. We had also talked about how these gunas bind us to the world. So sattva binds to knowledge and happiness, rajas to action, and tamas to heedlessness and indolence. And also, we had covered how the three gunas influence our future births and why we should transcend the three gunas, because then the actions don't taint us. See, that we had covered as far back as chapter 5, that the actions then don't stick to us. When we do obligatory actions in the spirit of service and sacrifice, they don't taint us. Again, this was revised in the previous chapter, that why we have to go beyond the gunas. Now it was with respect to the three gunas, our composition. And then Lord Krishna had gone on to say that one who transcends the gunas becomes Brahman or merges with God or attains moksha. Now, this chapter, Purushottam Yoga, or Yoga of the Supreme Being, of that God, what is that God, is a small chapter, 20 verses, and it takes on from where the previous chapter ended, where Lord Krishna says that one who transcends the three gunas by single pointed devotion or bhakti becomes Brahman, the goal. This chapter, therefore, now is laying out the blueprint for developing bhakti. Or what is bhakti? Understanding of that goal. So the chapter is only talking about Brahman, the nature of Brahman. So what we will be covering are Kshar, Akshar, and Purushottam. So Kshar is the manifested part, the perishable aspect, as macrocosm, microcosm, and we will take up the famous metaphor of the inverted Ashwath tree. Then we will cover the imperishable or the Akshar aspect, which to some extent we had covered in chapter 8, which was the Akshar Brahma Yoga. And then lastly, we will cover the Uttam Purush aspect or the Supreme Being, that is beyond both the perishable and the imperishable aspect of Brahman. So that is how the chapter is divided. So I will chant I'll commence with verse number 1. Shri Bhagavanuvachah ऊर्ध्वमूलमधशाखम् अश्वत्थं प्राहुरव्ययम् छन्दांसि यस्य पर्णानि यस्तदं वेद स वेदवेत्तः. So the Lord said, they, implying the wise. So they speak of the indestructible people tree having its root above and branches below, whose leaves are Vedic hymns. One who knows it is the knower of Vedas. So let's take this up word by word. Shri Bhagwanu Vach, the Lord said, Uddharva Moolam. Uddharv is above. Mool is root. So Uddhav Moolam becomes with root above. Adha Shakham. Adha means below. Shakh is branch. So Adha Shakham becomes with branches below. Ashwatham is the name of that tree, people, fig tree. Prahu, speak of, they speak of. Avyayam, imperishable, immutable, not changeable. Chandansi. So Chand refers to the hymns of the Vedas. So that is what the word means here. Chandansi, hymns of the Vedas. Yasya, of which Parnani is the leaves. Yaha, one who. Tama, that. Ved is to know. Saha, that person. Vedavit is the knower of Vedas. So the verse translates to the Lord said, they speak of the indestructible people tree having its root above and branches below, whose leaves are Vedic hymns. One who knows it is a knower of Vedas. So let's chant this great verse. Shri Bhagavanuvachah ऊर्ध्वमूलं मधशाखम् अश्वत्थं प्राहुरव्ययम् छन्दांसि यस्य पर्णानि यस्तदं वेद स वेदवेत्ताः. So the last verse of the previous chapter read, and those serving me with unswerving yoga of devotion and crossing, transcending the gunas, is fit for becoming Brahman. So Krishna appears to be propounding the Bhakti Yoga in the towards the end of the previous chapter. Now the question naturally arises is how to inculcate bhakti. And that is what is presented before us in this particular chapter by talking about that Paramatman or that Purushottam. Now, the first verse starts with the root above. So, immediately, I mean, okay, we took a long break, but otherwise, if you're reading the text, you say, okay, did I miss something? How can you have the root which points upward? So, the idea is to improve our concentration and pay attention to what is being covered so that we have not misunderstood. We've not misunderstood. The verse is saying with the root above. Okay. Now the blueprint for bhakti is being graphically presented before us using the famous metaphor of the inverted peepal tree or the ashwatha tree. Now the botanical name for people is Ficus religiosa. Okay. And if we look at the word Ashwatha, so I will just do the Sandhi Vichhed so that we don't forget this word. See, Shwa means tomorrow in Sanskrit. Shwatha means which exists tomorrow. That means which is there tomorrow. Ashwataha means which is not there tomorrow. So, Ashwatha means that will not remain the same, or something that will change even on the next day, or something that is constantly changing, like the world that is constantly changing around us, shifting, moving, it's perishable, ephemeral. It is continuously changing. So that is the Ashwatthah tree for us, right? Or this thing which is being presented to us is the tree of flux, the tree of change. Now, the nature of this tree is that it has its root above, root, only one root, and branches below. Now, you can check this out. In, I mean, the bottom, you can Google it and or you can revise your botany, whatever you learned in the school, during the school curriculum. People tree has a taproot system. In the taproot system, there is only one main root. So the one root of Ashwatha symbolizes Brahman, God, from which the entire creation emerges. So the branches of this tree go uh, are below. I mean, the root is up and the branches are below. So I don't know how many of you noticed the um, tree I had used for this particular chapter was the inverted tree. If you might have noticed. Anyway, I will share the picture here also with you. Uh, just give me a moment. So see, there is one tap root which goes up and the branches which come down. So this is what we are talking about. This is the inverted people tree. So now let us understand the metaphor completely. The one root of the Ashwath tree symbolizes God from which the entire creation emerges. And Uddharva Moolam, that is the word that we start the verse with, places the root above, indicates the God's highest status or stature. So the best way to understand this is that when you have a family tree or you have an organization chart, typically you have only one item at the head of the chart, or maybe two items in case of a family tree. Okay. So the highest item, the head of the company, enjoys the highest status, indicating authority and superiority, and the maintainer and provider for the rest of the people who come below in the organization chart. Same logic applies to the family tree. Now, Adha Shakam, the branches extending downwards, actually cover the multifold activities of all life forms of the material realm, or encompassing all creation or everything that we see around us. So that is what the branches are. Chandansi Parnani. So this we are talking about the leaves being the knowledge actually of the Vedic hymns, which represent the knowledge which has come in from the or emerged from that pure knowledge, the one and only knowledge, the source of all knowledge, the ultimate knowledge. Or we are talking about the different awarenesses that arise from that one pure awareness. Also, the leaves actually take the nutrition from the root, or the nourishment or the knowledge that the entire activity, the entire creation, the entire world draws is from that source, from that God. So the source, the head of the family or the head of the organization is the nourisher, provider for the entire creation. Just as the head of the company is the nourisher, provider for the company, head of the family for the family, head of the nation for the complete nation, and so on and so forth. So God supports and provides for the entire creation. Now, in chapter 13, Lord Krishna had actually revealed knowledge, Gyan, that pure awareness, Gayam, that which ought to be known, and Gyan Gamyam, or the goal of knowledge, or the culmination of all knowledge, or Gyan. So that is where we had actually covered in detail what we are putting as a line item here, the Chandansi Parnani, or the various consciousness that arise from that one pure consciousness. So that is when we had covered this part. So the underlying import of this verse is that when you have developed bhakti, you should know what you are developing it for. So, like, you may say that, okay, I want to go to Mount Everest. So that is my goal. But I have to first understand what going up to Mount Everest means. I have to understand the height, the altitude, the climatic composition at the time of the year when that climb would be possible, how to physically train myself, what all can I take with me, am I capable, if I'm not capable, what all do I need to work on before I go on this trip to the Mount Everest or even to the Mount Everest base camp. I have to develop myself. I have to understand my goal, that this is what my goal is. So, when we talk of bhakti, normally we treat bhakti yoga and gyan yoga as two diverse paths, and karma yoga, of course. We think as three different paths. No, that's not true. To develop bhakti, you have to understand for what are you developing that bhakti. So you have to understand, have knowledge or have gyan about your goal. And accordingly, your actions have to uh, be aligned. So if we go for a Mount Everest example again, go back to that example. If if I don't think I'm capable enough, I will maybe hire a trainer who will ensure that my body, I become physically fit to be able to take that kind of activity. So action automatically aligns with the goal. So all the three paths, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, are actually they work in tandem. They work together. So one who recognizes the source and that source and understands that that source is what nurtures and supports the manifold expressions, which are actually the knowledge of the Vedas, understands that which is to be known. So the leaves of the Ashwath tree, coming back to the metaphor, nourish the material existence of the soul and the entire creation, and they perpetuate the continuous cycle of birth and death. Now, see what happens. This cycle is continuous of birth and death. But as an individual Jivatma, as an individual soul, I do not experience the continuity. Whereas the tree on which or which is supporting this continuity is aware of this distinct cycles. So the Ashwath tree is being referred to as avayayam or imperishable. The souls are born and die, and the tree relatively seems to have an endless life. So it's the same. If we take another cycle, is that how do we get rain? Water from the oceans evaporates, forming clouds that provide rain to the earth. Now, this water flows into rivers and flows from the rivers to the ocean. And again, the same water evaporates. So, this is a continuous cycle. Similarly, the cycle of life and death is also continuous till the time we take that path of no return, which we had just covered in the recap, which was covered in one of the previous chapters. Now, the inverted tree metaphor, I would like to bring out 2 points why it's interesting. The tree of life is interesting because the entire tree is nourished by that one root. Second point is that the tree is never static, it's ever changing, always changing. And for those of you who would like to delve further into this particular metaphor, this is the famous metaphor that is there in Kathopanishad. Kathopanishad, section 2, subsection 3, verse 1. So that particular verse reads, there exists the eternal Ashwath tree that has its root above and branches below. It alone is Shukra. Shukra means pure, quick. It alone is Shukra. It alone is Brahma, the greatest one. It alone is Amrit, immortal. In that, all habitable worlds find refuge. No one can exceed it. This is that. So this is the way the Upanishads talk, that this is what is needs to be known. That is to be known. So Upanishads follow a different. They talk at a higher level. Bhagwad Gita talks at a slightly more functional level, which is at our level. And but nevertheless, the same metaphor is taken from Kathopanishad, and I have been mentioning off and on that according to some schools of thought, Bhagavad Gita is actually a treatise on Kathopanishad, on the last boon that Nachiketa had asked Lord Yamraj. So it is actually an explanation, a detailed explanation of what Yamraj had told Nachiketa in Kat Upanishad. So you may like to visit this, and you may remember that certain verses of, I think, of chapter 2, two verses were picked up verbatim from Kat Upanishads. This metaphor is again one such example. The language changes, but the metaphor is the same. With that, let's move on to verse number 2 for the day. अधश्चोधर्वं प्रसृतस्तस्य शाखा गुणप्रवृद्धा विषयप्रवाला अधश्च मूलान्यनुसन्ततानि कर्मानुबन्धिनि मनुष्यलोके. So the verse translates to, its branches spread below and above, nourished by the gunas, sense objects are its buds, and its roots stretch below as actions binding men in the world. Let's take this up word by word. Adha is below, cha and udharv above, prasrita is spread, tasya its shakha branches, gun pravriddha. Gun are the gunas, pravriddha is nourished, so gun pravriddha become nourished by the gunas. Vishay pravala, vishay is senses, and pravala is buds. So Vishay pravala becomes with buds as sense objects. Adha below, cha and mulani. So plural here, roots. Anusantatani, stretch. Karm, karmanu bandhini is bonds of karma. Karma is action, bandhan is the bond. So karmanu bandhini becomes bonds of karma or actions. Manushya loke, Manushya is world, men, lok is world, so Manushya loke becomes in the world of men. So the verse translates to, its branches spread below and above, nourished by the gunas, sense objects are its buds, and its roots stretch below as actions binding men in the world. Let's chant together. अधश्चोद्धर्वं प्रसृतस्तस्य शाखा गुणप्रवृद्धा विषयप्रवाला अधश्च मूलान्युन् सन्ततानि कर्मानुबन्धिनि मनुष्यलोके. So, in this verse, the description of the tree of life or the tree of flux or the tree of change continues. What is it saying now, this verse? That the branches spread below and above, nourished by the gunas, which we had covered in detail in the previous chapter. Its buds or sprouts are the sense objects, and roots. Now, here the roots that we are talking about are the secondary and the tertiary roots. The roots stretch below as actions binding men or humans in the world. So the branches, so actually if you look at this particular metaphor, it's covering all the chapters that we have been talking about, chapter 3, 4, 5, right? So now this is a gist of what we have been reading there, that how we must control our desires, let our mind not be on a sense object, because that gives rise to buds and sprouts. That is what is being mentioned here. So branches here now represent the numerous activities that we do in the course of a lifetime, or and we're talking of the entire creation here, not only one individual but the entire humankind, the entire animal kind, etc., and so forth. But because the animals and plant kingdom, they do not have a choice, they're really not that responsible as humans are for the kind of actions that they choose to do. Now, just as not all the branches, if you observe the tree, the upright tree with its root down, you'll find that some branches come down and some branches go up. So some branches move towards the sun and some branches are moving towards the ground. Similarly, in this inverted people tree, not all actions of ours are leading us to God. So when we talked about the divinity in us and the devil, our bad nature, our good qualities will take us towards God and our bad actions will take us away from God. So some of our activities are evolutionary, reaching upwards towards Brahman, and others are devolutionary, leading us downward and going into the world, into this huge network of branches, leaves, and so on and so forth. Then what prompts us to act? The branches, are the representing the numerous activities. What is prompting action? So the verse says that they are nourished. The branches which spread below are nourished by the gunas. It is our gunas, our vasanas, which are prompting us to act, or our content. Uh, this, the content, the gunas we covered in chapter 14 are sattvic, or the pure content, rajasic, passionate, and tamasic is the indolent content. So we have to be very careful and we should be aware of which gunas we are cultivating within us. Because whatever gunas we cultivate, that is the kind of activity we will do. So someone who is always thinking of money will take up those kind of activities which will get him money. Now it could be a business management, or it could be stealing. Now the action will depend upon the content of the person again, which will determine the direction of the branch which we are talking about. So some branches go up and some branches go down. And we have read this, that we are all, each one of us is a combination of these three gunas in different proportion. So some of us maybe have more of sattvic content, some people may have more of rajasic, someone may have tamasic, but nevertheless we are a combination of all the three gunas. So accordingly, based on our content and the broad categories of people, sattvic are the grade A people who are serene and poised. Rajasic are the grade B people who are, the agitated majority that we see around us, always seeking and moving out into the world. And tamasic is the grade C, which is dull, inactive, ignorant kind of people. So this is the broad category of people. So accordingly, we will act. And as I mentioned earlier, this was covered in detail in the previous chapter. So each of the chapter, now you see how it's building on the previous chapter, and the details have been actually covered already. Now, interestingly, the verse goes on to say that the sprouts are the sense objects. So just as sprouts or buds have the potential to develop into branches, sense objects on which our mind goes and rests, you know, have the potential to develop into further action. So for those of you who do gardening, if you cut the branch of a tree, after some time, you will find after a few days that more buds or sprouts have come there, because now the tree wants to, you have truncated something prematurely. The tree wants to grow, right? You have curtailed that growth. So it'll grow with vengeance at that particular point. Similarly, in our context, in the spiritual context, if you remember the previous chapters where we had said that those people who sit pretending that they do not, whose mind is actually on the sense objects, but they sit in uh, shunning them, are actually hypocrites, and they're not true to themselves. And now the result is coming out that this is what will happen to them. The sense objects will, after some time, or the mind resting on those sense objects will develop into further vasanas and thoughts and actions. So, from which many branches or activities will sprout at that point. The main root of the previous verse was pointing upward towards, and that symbolized God, from which the entire creation emerged. The roots of this verse refer to the secondary and the tertiary roots, and they correspond to the vasanas within us, which will bind us to the world. And how? Because we will do the action accordingly, and each action, if we cultivate more desires, it will bind us more and more into the world. You may recollect the chronology of action that we have been discussing from chapter 3 onwards, that vasanas, the causal body, give rise to that kind of thoughts, which give rise to those kind of desires, and which give rise to those kind of action. So this is what we are talking about here now. In the metaphor, the vasanas uphold this material world by keeping our attachment to it alive. So with that, we conclude today's session.